All right, guys, at long last, we're going to continue Genesis. We've actually done some other stuff, but haven't posted it yet, and we may not. We haven't been dilly-dallying, but we're back at Genesis 1, and I believe we got through verse 8, right, Andrew?
That's correct.
All right, Andrew Isker is here with me, like before. I'm Mark Horn, and so we talked about the first 2 days. I hope we had some interesting discussion. Please go back and look at that. There'll be links probably on YouTube and also in the blog where I post this as well, the blog entry on Solomon Says, and probably wherever Andrew posted anywhere. You can also do the previous video, do a link to it. But I did want to really say one thing. We talked about the expanse, the division between heaven and earth last time, and how I said this was actually something temporary. This is something that Jesus actually, according to Ephesians 1, he actually altered the situation so that he united heaven and earth together in his person and himself. He kind of takes the place of the permanent boundary or this barrier or expanse or whatever you call it. And one of the main pieces of evidence that I forgot to mention about the second day is the second day of creation is the only day where God does not declare that what he has made is good. So we know that God doesn't make things that are evil, but he does make things that are incomplete. So in Genesis 2, we'll come up with a statement that God sees as not good for Adam to be alone. Now, he made Adam alone, but that was not what the full process needed to be. He was going to do something else as well. Adam was incomplete without Eve. So here, that's more evidence that this is temporary, that though the heavens have been made in a seemingly perfect and final form, and the earth is made through these stages that we're going through, there's a transformation of the whole relationship between heaven and earth that's to come about in the future. So that's more evidence that that's the case. And I just wanted to bring that up because the major thing to leave out of our last discussion. Does that make sense to you, Andrew?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
All right. Well, good. So if it doesn't make sense to anyone else, think about it. I think it will.
At least that's right. Absolutely.
All right. So all right. I've got the NSB again. You probably got the NKJV. Is that right?
I do.
All right.
That's a good mix, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, good mix. I agree. So I'll read. I've got these big boldhead paragraph divisions, which are entirely, of course, kind of infer. They're not actually. The Hebrew doesn't have them, but anyway. But so I'll go by them and read verses 9 to 13. Okay. So.
Okay.
All right. Then God said, "Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God called the dry land earth. Oh, excuse me. Did I skip a bit? There we go. Sorry. I just started repeating myself. Go verse 11. Then God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them on the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seeds in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. So here, that actually, the first thing to say, just based on what I said about the second day, is nothing was good in the second day. Here we've got two statements. It's all good. It's not just the day, but the first, the dry land and the seas, and then the vegetation and the plants. So that makes me kind of I wonder if that means, so there's 7 blessings, even though they're not all on the 7th day, or the 6 blessings, even though they're not on the 6th day. But I haven't counted them yet. I don't remember, so I'm gonna just hold that thought. All right. Before I see anything else, I'll let you butt in if you have any notes that you want to share at this point. First about the land and the sea. I know you went through this earlier. I'm not sure if you said
Mhm.
much about that, but one of the things I think of course, is that means, the later you find them talking about the Exodus and the crossing of the Red Sea being a new creation. Isaiah
Mhm.
talks that way about how I founded the earth and established the seas and said, "You are my
Mhm.
people." I think that's Isaiah 60. Golly, I'm not going to remember right. But the point here is that the sea and the land being drawn out of the sea, the sea being put in one
Mhm.
place.
Mhm.
Later salvations that God works are compared to that. Like, for instance, the most obvious
Mhm.
one being the flood,
Mhm. Yep, that's where
because
I was gonna
God
go.
covered.
Yep.
Yeah, all right. Well, yeah. So
Yep.
the sea covers everything, and that's partly almost all the way goes all the way back to like the almost looks like the situation even before creation started. When everything was
Mhm.
watery and chaos. But in any case,
Mhm.
God brings out the land, separates the sea. If that's the initial creation in this passage, then it's a recreation for Noah. And of course,
Yeah.
Noah's.
Yeah. So exactly. Yeah. So when we get to Noah, when we get to chapter 6, it's the same thing. You have water covering the earth, and then separating sea and dry land again. And so that's the main parallel. I would say the main parallel
Yeah, but it
between
also
Noah
opens up
and Genesis
others.
is the new creation. Yeah, and
Right.
really just that's that paradigm of new creation, of a new creation, and all the way to to the New Testament where the type of Noah is brought up by Peter as what is going on in baptism, right? So
Right.
here we have so if you have the question of it's what is baptism? What is baptism about? Well, bringing it all back to the very first chapter of Genesis. Well, here we are. We have that separation of the sea and the dry land. We have that creation taking place. It's here where we begin to lay the foundations and flesh out what the meaning of baptism is.
That is very true, and I think it's kind of tied into the water above. But also, of
Yeah. Oh
course,
yeah.
when we come to Noah, he's going to be given the same mandate that Adam is given, to be fruitful and
hmm
multiply. So it's a new creation. He's
Yes.
a new Adam. And we go further and say the dove. In fact, this is one of the original realizations that actually, I think, made me able to start interpreting the Bible correctly. We got the Spirit hovering over the waters here in Genesis 1. We talked about it last week, but I didn't mention that. So in Noah, when everything's covered with water, he sends out this dove, which goes and tries to find new life in this watery, what
hmm
has been this
hmm
watery environment. And we don't have to ask or wonder if those things are correlated, because, of course, when Jesus comes up out of the water of the Jordan at his baptism, then the Holy Spirit comes in the form of a dove.
Yes.
Well, why the
Yep.
form of a dove? The only reason it would be the form of a dove is because we are supposed to read Genesis 1 and
hmm
kind of merge it in our mind with Genesis 8. It just, there's no other way to look at it, because it just assumes that kind of background is there, that this all makes sense. So anyway, and of course that makes Jesus a new creation, and well, we'll, you know, wait till we're like reach the Gospels, right? But anyway,
Yeah,
so
that's right.
we're just
That's
kidding.
right.
I'm not planning to do it that far, but so it's all here. So the other thing, I thought this might be a good time to address this three-story universe that's kind of being portrayed here, because
Yeah,
that,
I
of
wish I
course,
could,
is
hold up a
what's that?
diagram and show
Oh
the
yeah.
three-story universe. Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, um, we talk about Jim Jordan a lot, and through New Eyes, he talked about that the ancients never necessarily took this stuff, as we would say, as literally or as a scientific description. He doesn't
hmm
think that anyone in India really believed that the world was lying on a big turtle and held up by elephants and that kind of thing. And so
That's right.
pagans weren't
And
that
turtles all the
dumb.
way down. Yeah.
That's not
Yep.
the issue here. Now, anytime you go to the beach or to a lake, sorry, to keep us in the Midwest in the loop here.
That's right.
Anytime we go
We
to a
have big lakes
shore
here. Yeah.
of a body of water, yeah, you have bigger ones than I do. Any way you do it, you will see the water beneath the land land above the water, and the sky above the land. That's all this is. It makes it into a kind of house image, but it's or a building image, but it's this 3-story, 3-layer universe is.
Yeah.
And furthermore, it kind of has to do with us being bipeds. So I guess what I'm saying is, if we like go into 0G environments in space someday, or God forbid, start experimenting with, transmuting ourselves genetically into different kinds of creatures that don't have this kind of head above feet kind of, you know what I'm saying, bipedal structure.
I can tell you've been reading that Hideous Strength. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, that's actually no. I thought of it before. Hideous Strength is making me think about how bad that would be. But the point is,
yeah, that's right.
this stuff is immediately relevant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you there?
I am. Yep.
Okay. Well, I just got a phone call. I had to mute it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that, the Bible knows what it's doing here, and it's not necessarily saying anything about the earth being flat or circular, or, whether it making a case for one or the other, or denying planets exist or anything like that. The point is, in human experience, we live on a plane where water sinks down lower than the land, and at least the land, the dry land that we stand on, and the sky is above us. It's just that simple. And the mountains are like pillars, and so the mountains go up. So it's like, like the what is it? The movie. This is probably before your time, Andrew. I don't know if you ever saw it. I hate being reminded of this terrible cultural gap here between us. But if someone wants to go back and watch the Close Encounters of the Third Time, which was a huge hit.
Oh yeah, I know this movie, of course, yeah.
All right, well the UFO is like this big shapeless mass. It's like a city, and it's like a cloud. It's shiny. It comes down on Devil's Tower. So Devil's Tower is Sinai. The cloud, the whole spirit that we talked about last week that was hovering over the waters, the spirit, this theophany, or of course it's alien, so I don't mean it. But it's kind of a secular religious experience,
Well, aliens, I mean, the whole alien meme, aliens are the heavenly host, are demons, angels, whatever. I think, I think Hollywood, the whole world, they get this. Spielberg's Jewish. He gets the symbolism
but the point
of
is,
these things.
They could have had the whole thing take place in a big over the lake or on the plains, but no, Devil's Tower. So you go up and meet them. They come down to you. Heaven's above, earth is beneath. You go up. Moses goes up, gets the Ten Commandments. The people go up, communicate with it, those musical notes to the aliens. So,
Bum, bum, bum. Yep.
So I'm just saying that stuff it's perfectly accessible, I think, if you just be a little bit creative with it and think about it for a minute. These images are not something that we can't accept anymore because we're scientific. I mean, the fact is, we still say sunset and sunrise, even though we're all heliocentrists or whatever. We're not heliocentrists anymore.
Oh, precisely.
Yeah. So it just
precisely. So that's just the thing. I mean, the symbolic universe of the Bible is not in this. It's not presenting something that isn't real, but it's presenting something from a perspective in a language, in a particular language. Not necessarily in a verbal language, but in the language of the Bible, in a symbolic language that communicates what's going on. So it isn't so much is this scientifically exactly what's happening. That's not the point. That's not what's going on. It's from this ancient human perspective, how is the world this three-decker universe? Heaven above, earth, and waters below the earth.
Yeah.
It's communicating that, and ancient people universally understood the world in this way, and it didn't mean this they were stupid. Ptolemy, the ancient Greek general and ruler, calculated the diameter of the earth, not super accurately, but was able to figure out pretty close the exact diameter of the earth from, and they didn't have the Hubble Space Telescope, and they didn't have rockets going into outer space or anything like that. So ancient man was as scientific or more than we are today. It's chronological snobbery to say otherwise. It's the symbolism of the Bible is a completely different animal. It's like it's like watching a David Lynch film, or something like that. It's the weirdness of the Bible is you could say intentional. It's a completely different way of communicating, not in the sense that it's not describing something literal, or that ancient believers didn't believe in science or something like this, or the natural world. Well, they did. So anyway, a long digression, but I think it's useful. I think it's useful to discuss this stuff.
And I mean, the point is, we have to live here, and however we understand our environment on the perceptual everyday level, we're going to have to live here and think of it as our home. And that's how the Bible presents it. So I guess the thing is, when we think of God, typically we think if he knows so much, he's got to be like, since he's omniscient, he must be aware of the cosmos, however big it is, and all these different atoms and everything. We think, well, therefore, this part of it isn't significant. Well, it is significant, and there's something about humanity that is tied to that, both in terms of him caring for us and also us being made in his image, so that somehow, from this perspective, we can get to know it. Well, there's a lot we could say there. I just want to address that. It's always surprised me that the vegetation is made on the same day that the earth is separated from the waters. I guess the point is that God doesn't want the earth to be barren even for a moment. I'm just spitballing here.
No, I think that's the very first thought I have, is that the earth exists, that the dry land exists to be fruitful, right? To produce something, and not to produce something to no end. I mean, what's the end to which all of the the grass and the herb and the fruit tree and all of these things? What's the point of those things bearing fruit? This day presupposes the animal life that's about to come, and then the human life that comes at the end. It's this the days of creation, this layered thing that builds on top of one another, and this fruitfulness isn't, if it just stopped on this day, it would be like, well, what was the point of that, right? It's all working toward the creation of humanity, right? Of these creatures that are made, and it's hard to. I mean, I'm getting ahead of us a little bit, but it's hard to just grapple with the idea. I mean, it's in vogue to talk about Imago Dei. I think people are made in the image of God, which people try to use to push all sorts of political things. But just the idea that God would create this creature like him, right? That's like him, and that he's made to be this gem of creation, to rule, right? And so the trees and the vegetation bearing fruit isn't just isn't that flower beautiful, and isn't this nice? That's true. That's part of the reason why God makes it. He could have made every fruit tree and plant and everything ugly. I mean, Jesus talks about this: the lilies adorned, right? Greater than Solomon. So the beauty of creation is an end unto itself, but it's also the utility of it. That this is what sustains life for both animals and humanity.
Well, I agree, and I think that also here I think we'll find more and more characteristics mentioned that are then culminate in man. For instance, humanity is supposed to also spread over the earth. And there's going to be talk about the seed of the woman, and this, so
Mm-hmm.
there's a picture of humanity already kind of developing, and it'll become clear as we get closer. We'll see those kind of things happen more and more. Also, there is some talk, and I think this is a little bit beyond my level of how much Hebrew I know, but I do think that some of these are certain kinds of plants. I have a note, and I'm pretty sure I got this from a Jim Jordan lecture on these are trees and grain. Trees, obviously, but also the kind of plants that is described are, in fact, grains. Now, the thing is, I think Jim always excluded vines and grapevines, from that, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
In the parable that one of Gideon's sons tells, it's in Judges. He tells
Mm-hmm.
us a parable of the trees, very much
And
kind
the
of like
brambles.
rush. Yeah, the brambles
Yeah.
mentioned, but he mentions 3 types of trees that are asked to be king of the forest, and
Yeah.
I mean, and the third one is the vine, and he
Mm-hmm.
seems to be. It seems to be regarded by them as a fruit tree. I mean, now I might be wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but I would actually kind of include. I would tend to think that the fruit tree that's the include vines. Now the point of saying that is that this means that
Yeah.
these plants are the kind of stuff used in the Lord's Supper. You got the basic 2 types
Mm-hmm.
here. You got the fruit, and you've got the grain, the bread. Um, also another thing that is important in the Old Testament system was olive oil. Oil for lights and
Yes.
that kind of thing. And so that would
Yeah.
also be.
Anointing and everything else. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the thing is, we're
Absolutely.
also going to see later, like when stars are explicitly talked about in terms of reference to the guidance in worship and use in worship, not to be worship, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but to be
Mm-hmm.
signposts. So that kind of consideration is already being brought up in Genesis 1, I believe.
Yeah.
I think I'm
Yeah.
justified saying that. So
Yeah.
that's
We're
the
getting
third.
ahead to the next couple of verses. Yeah.
Yeah. Are we?
We're,
I think. And speaking of which,
spoiler
are we ready?
alert. Yeah.
Are we ready to go to the next day?
Yeah. Let me
So what?
read those in the
14
New
through
King James
19.
here.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth." And it was so. Then God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the 4th day.
Okay. 4th day, 4th seeing and evaluating and saying it's all good, even though he didn't do it on the 2nd day, but he did it twice on the 3rd. So this is where I sometimes get confused on what exactly the firmament is. It seems to be like the entire sky above the earth, including like it's thick. It's the whole cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked about last week about sometimes I think it's just like more like a supernatural veil or division. But anyway, I'm not going to settle that right now. But I find it interesting that he never calls the 2 great lights, or obviously the sun and the moon, but those words aren't used till later in Genesis. And I always wonder about that. I had an idea about
Mm-hmm.
that, but I'm sure it was really a good idea, but I can't remember it, so I'm not going to say it. But signs and seasons. That seasons is the same thing as festival times. That word is used
Yes.
throughout the Pentateuch. It's the times that their festivals are supposed to be held. So these stars are meant to give them guidance for when they are how their year is supposed to work, and their festivals, the Passover, the Pentecost, the Feast of Booths, etc. And also the signs. if they rule, then you would think they might be signs for rulers. And of course, every Christmas we learn about the Magi seeing the great star that's
Yes.
ruling the night, and that means there's a new king. I mean, and there's all sorts of things. Not to get into anything controversial, but how do the prophets describe it when a king or a nation is about to be destroyed or put in a revolution?
Yeah.
Whether the stars gonna fall off the sky,
Yeah.
moon's gonna turn blood red. All right, so when Joseph gets his vision,
Exactly.
which I think is when the first time the sun and moon are actually set. I'm not sure. But
after Genesis 1. Yep.
yeah, well, Genesis 1
Yeah.
doesn't use the words. It's just something that's weird. It's
Yeah.
like it anyway. But
Yeah.
But I was going to say Joseph sees himself as a ruler, and all his family as rulers, and all the stars and the moon, sun, and moon bow to him. So he's the ultimate ruler. Of course, he becomes a new star because he ends up being the Pharaoh's right-hand man, the ruler of all the earth. So these lights represent, I think, powers and kings, and the idea of governing day and night, separating light and the darkness, something that's been happening without the stars. It's now attached to the stars. The stars and the sun and moon are given that job. But this is something. So when we read Isaiah or Ezekiel or Jeremiah about stars and being disrupted, it doesn't necessarily mean that huge balls of flaming gas in the sky are going to collapse on the earth. It's probably talking about political upheaval and God's judgment on the nations, and it's described as a big cosmic upheaval, kind of the way I think Churchill talked about the night the lights went out in Europe. He was talking about war. And of course, there were power outages at that time. So, I mean, I guess you could say it's literal, but I think he was being a little bit more, figurative.
That's not what he means. Yeah, well, and even, it's when you get into, I just had a discussion with my friend Christopher Coe, who's done a lot of research on this topic, but you have, in Deuteronomy 32, you have this, at least in the Septuagint and Dead Sea Scrolls, and I think you can extrapolate the argument in the Masoretic text. But in Deuteronomy 32, you have this worldview, I guess you could call it, where every one of the nations, the 70 nations that God has made, has a member of the heavenly host that rules over it, right? And so then when you get into some of these prophetic texts, whether it's Isaiah or whether you get to Matthew 24, where it talks about stars falling out of the sky or the moon turning to blood, things like this, where you have these heavenly bodies that are referenced. It isn't that a supernova is happening or that you have a meteor shower or things of that nature. It is that the lowercase g gods that govern each nation are getting cast down when Persia is destroyed by Alexander the Great, or the Babylonians are destroyed by the Persians, or the Greeks are destroyed by the Romans, right? So these types of things are what happen, and so really that's the kind of thing that's going on. And so when these stars are governing the seasons and governing time, that's a significant thing. That it isn't just, oh well, now now's the time to go harvest your barley, right? Well, it's the entire cultic calendar of Israel is governed by the seasons and by where the moon is, right? And then you get to the new covenant, and now everything is the day, right? So we could get into that, where the old covenant is the light of night, it's the shadowy thing, where there's light in the darkness, and then you get to the new covenant, and it is light everywhere, right? It's it's the
which,
greater
by the way,
light. Yeah.
Which we have to then that mention that then this thing about evening being first and then morning is kind of significant.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Night
it
comes
is.
first, then day. So that goes along with what you say. I was gonna say I'm almost tempted to. I'll briefly mention that there's a good case to be made that the 12 tribes of Israel around the tabernacle come pretty close to like the 12 sign houses of the zodiac as maybe.
Yes.
I think what is Scorpio used to be considered something else. I mean, there's one of the animals gets changed,
Mm-hmm.
but there's some good.
Well, just even all the constellations. I mean, that's and when you get to Joseph's dream, well, what is it? Is it those constellations bowing down to him?
Yeah.
Are they represented by those?
And the constellations
it gets a little speculative, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, the constellations I think are explicitly mentioned several times in Job, so they knew about them. They're part of their worldview.
Yeah.
Their knowledge.
Yes, absolutely.
And of course,
absolutely.
they would be a lot more familiar with them because they'd see them every night. They wouldn't have their own lights, even the kind of dominion we are, where we actually like outshine the stars at night because we've got better lights, to use.
That's right. Yeah.
All right.
Have
so
LEDs. Yeah.
so God's established His lights. Let's just go ahead to the next day then. 20 to 22. 23. Okay.
23.
Yeah. 2023. Yeah. So then God said, "Let the waters," plural because waters are plural word. "Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens." And God created the great sea monsters, and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm after their kind, and every winged bird. I mean, actually, I think it only says winged, but anyway, every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them. This is new, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And there is evening and there is morning, a fifth day.
So you've already mentioned this triple-decker universe that the Bible presents. So you have waters below, earth in the middle, and sky above the earth. And so here on this day, you have the waters filled with life and the sky filled with life. And the earth, nothing going on yet. But
the plants.
You have except
the birds multiply on the earth, by the way. So, verse 22, so there's actually you can go a couple different ways. One way is to go days 1, 2, 3 are parallel to 4, 5, 6.
Mm-hmm.
But also a case has been made that it's more like days 1, 4, and 7 are like, oh, well, I'd have to talk about chiasms in this. I won't do that. Never mind. Let's just go. Yeah. I mean, very popular. There's more than one way to like structure this passage.
There is.
And a pretty common intuitive way is the way you said, and it's 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6 are parallel. God creates light. God creates stars. God separates the waters above and waters below. God makes fish, and God makes birds, and then losing my mind here.
And it doesn't have to be. Yeah, it doesn't have to be just this way. It doesn't have to be days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as the parallel. Yeah. The way the Bible is, it doesn't box us into this is the only way to see the literary structure of this passage. It's a multifaceted book. Yeah.
So
anyway.
But by the way, the fact that here God actually does something different, He blesses the creatures and tells them to be fruitful, multiply. that,
Mhm.
I said the plants are kind of like human beings in some regards, and now
Mhm.
and of course the Bible is full of this stuff about people being like trees and whatnot,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
bad
Psalm
men being
1
like
is the
brambles. Yeah, someone
Yep.
and
Yep.
but here, all right, he makes fish and he makes birds and he blesses them. He gives them a kind of, which is what he's going to do when mankind is created. He's going to bless them as well. It's the same kind of thing. Also, and I'm not prepared to say everything that could be said about this because there's a lot, but you can go through your Bible and look for all the sea monsters because
Yeah.
they do show up.
Yeah.
Eventually, as the imagery of Israel being the land and nations being the sea. So therefore,
Mhm.
the Gentile rulers become sea monsters. But also, I wonder if this, even though the serpent is a beast of the field, I wonder to some extent if he's related to these things. I'm not sure. Um,
Well,
but
I just think,
lots of
yeah, we get to this point on this day, this fifth day, and I can't help but think of Leviticus, and you have different, because you brought up that the analogy between man and the trees, right? You man and the trees, but then you have an even closer analogy between man and these types of animals in these next 2 days. You have there are clean birds and there are unclean birds, and there are clean
yeah,
sea creatures and unclean sea creatures. And yeah, then you get into the whole idea of the distinction between land and sea in the old covenant, and in the new covenant you have Israel is the people of the land, all throughout, and almost the entire Bible is full of land stuff, or in the old covenant, in the Old Testament, full of land stuff,
and people of the
except
land, like
for
farmers.
yes, except for one book, right? Except for Jonah is
Oh
is
yeah,
really the only book where you have sea stuff, where you have mariners, you have people out at sea, and then you have a great
that's right.
fish, and and he's vomited up on the dry land and going back to the land. Well, that's the most new covenant book
Right.
you could say in the old covenant. It really prefigures things going on, and even from the fact that Jonah, if you dig into it, I was in a Bible study this week where we went over Jonah, and I discovered for the first time where Jonah is from when he's mentioned in First or Second Kings. He's from basically between Cana and Nazareth, right? He's from Jesus's neighborhood.
Oh wow, I didn't remember
Yeah,
that.
and so
Yeah, I
it's
knew it was
like,
Northern Kingdom, so
wow,
that makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, he's from Galilee. Yeah,
Well,
he's
well, well,
from Jesus' neighborhood there. So yeah.
well, Jonah
Anyway,
gets his life gets saved by one of these sea creatures, and talking
yes,
about the Gentile rulers being compared to them. He wants to avoid Nineveh, so he goes to the ocean and ends up getting submerged in it, and his life is saved by this sea creature, and he's vomited up and
yeah,
realizes he's got to go to Nineveh. He's got to go talk to the king.
yeah,
He's got to go.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. The sea creature is Nineveh and saves him, and so he has to go there to save his people, even though he doesn't want to. Yeah.
so it's funny. I never even thought about it now because the other thing is that these wings, it's winged birds, but I think bats would be included. It's
Mhm.
winged anything with wings, winged creatures.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
because the Bible wouldn't necessarily divide them up according to what we care about.
Yeah, the modern taxonomy of
Yeah,
animals
right.
in the Linnaean taxonomy,
It's fine, but
it's not in view here. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not a. But what I'm saying is, the Israelites, they had. We find out, like in the Pentateuch later, that they had wings, corners is what they're usually called, on their garments.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and they were supposed to wear a blue tassel in those wings,
Yeah.
which is blue like the sky. So it seems like it's
Mhm.
obvious, the wings, and of course Jesus's wing of his garment gets touched, and that healed a woman who had an issue of blood. So
Mhm.
the Son of Man has healing on his wings. But so in a sense, I think both the sea monsters and these birds kind of also, I kind of want to make them both representative of angelic beings in some sense, whereas animals kind of associated with people, men. But
Mhm.
maybe I'm going too far. I just had those
I
thoughts now.
yeah,
but-
I don't think that's crazy at all. I think and the fact that Israel in particular is supposed to do those things, and they
Yeah.
are these people. They are the people who are supposed to be in God's council, right? So he has these lowercase g gods, the heavenly host that's in his
Mhm.
council. Even Satan in Job chapter 1 is part of his divine council.
has access,
and
yeah.
and the point is to bring Israel up. Like Adam was supposed to be that, he fails, but God is opening the door for Israel to be that angelic people. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, this requirement for them to be this way, to be like cherubim, right? To dress like cherubim. You have these wings.
Yeah.
It's not crazy to make those connections in here, because that's what's going on.
Yeah.
God's people are being compared to these things.
So why don't you read 24 to 25, and then we'll stop there, and we'll have the creation of man when we start again. Does that sound okay to you?
I think we need to spend the whole next episode on the creation of man.
Yeah,
for sure.
we can do that. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, we can wrap up on this one here. Yeah, hopefully
All right.
we're giving the people what they want here of
Okay.
all the Genesis content that they could get. Okay, verse 24. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind." And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good.
All right. I think later in Genesis 2, you talked about different kinds of animals and the dietary system, what kind of animals were acceptable to eat,
Yeah.
what kind weren't. It's interesting, later on, when Adam is naming the animals, we'll have God bring him two types of animals, but the cattle is already there. He names three types. The cattle is the domesticated animal. It's already in the garden. It doesn't have to be brought to Adam.
Mhm.
In this case, we have, let's see, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth. Those are basically the three types, and only the cattle would be like food for man later when he's eating animals. He's not eating animals yet.
Mhm.
And so these divisions actually do show up in kind of the divisions that are expounded on and elaborated later in the Pentateuch. I don't have much else to say because, of course, they're made on the same day as man.
Yes.
I can't make too much of that. I was going to say they represent man, and they do obviously the sacrificial system, but so do the birds. If you're poor, you can use the birds. That's from day
Mhm.
5. So that doesn't necessarily limit you. But nevertheless, they are important as symbols and representatives of humanity, which, and the other thing, by the way, is living creature. Mankind is going to be made with the breath is going to be given to him, transferred from God somehow, whatever that means. He's special, obviously,
Mhm.
but he
Mhm.
is a kind of animal, and by that I mean
Yeah.
he is a living creature. And
Yeah.
the word animal, as weird as the word animal, I had forgotten this, but that's from anima. That it refers to the fact that they're self-motivating. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
bestial or like that they're
Yeah. It
physical.
moves.
Or they're like
Yeah.
they are actually animated by some kind of spirit. They have some kind of spiritual
Yeah.
force in them, at least from the biblical perspective. And of course, that means their blood can be shed, and that's a death. That kind of
Mhm.
thing. Which is important for what happens, how the whole system works later on. But yeah, they are we're different than them. We're not animals in one sense, but we are made on the same day, and we do have stuff in common. We're living creatures, animated beings that move on the earth. So, and reproduce and all that good stuff. You got anything else to say about this? I guess. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess one last thing is that you do see, and I often try to look at things from the perspective of Leviticus, because it's such a eye-opening book in terms of the symbolic world of the Bible. And so when you're steeped in Leviticus, you see these kinds of things where it's like, well, there aren't any sea creatures that you can sacrifice. If you're poor, you could sacrifice, sky creatures, birds. But the thing that you're supposed to sacrifice, if you can, is beasts of the earth, clean ones, and all of the birds have to be clean too. But and you see the order of creation is the order that God gives here in Genesis 1 and what he did. It's in the order that they were created is closer to when God made man, right? So the closest thing to God is the very last thing is man, who he made in his own image. And then the next closest thing are the animals on the earth. And then the next closest thing to that are the animals in the sky, the birds and the flying things. And then the very first living thing is the ones in the sea. So that's interesting to me. It paints a picture really of the gradations of closeness to the image of God, and the symbolic connection.
And you're right. And it is interesting that of day 5, only the aerial creatures are allowed, not the some of them. I mean, it's a specific kind. So that's one, but only the flying ones, the ones that go into heavens, can be used. The ones that are in the sea are just. I think there is something called like porpoise skin involved in the tabernacle coverings, but that's about it. That's an outer layer. So other than that, fish aren't involved as far as like the sacrificial system and all of that.
And you think about the symbolic, symbolically. Well, who did the sea creatures represent? I mean, and you're looking at everything from here is the temple or the tabernacle. Here's the temple when they're in the land. Temple, land, and then the world, and the furthest part out of the world is the sea, right? And the creatures in the sea, and you have clean sea creatures, and that's those are the God-fearing Gentiles in the Bible. Then you have clean, you have wild, clean land creatures, and you have clean sky creatures, and those are Gentiles as well. But the domesticated clean animals, those are God's people. Those are the Israelites. So you have this same symbolism of closeness, of these gradations of radiating outward from the from the holy place, the temple, the tabernacle, all the way outward, into the world. And in the new covenant, you have God going out to all of that, to the ends of the earth, right? To the entire world. And so
Jesus catching a lot of fish.
Yes, 153, right? Right at the very end of John. And you have this, and it's a picture, right from the very beginning, right? This symbolic universe is presented to us, and then we see it in the new covenant. But unless you're like paying really close attention to Genesis, well, you just might miss this. I think I have little kids, and I'm trying to teach them the Bible, and I think in some ways it's easier than adults who have had Bible their whole lives, because this is all new to them. But if you teach Genesis really well, to an adult reading Genesis who's been steeped in 4 spiritual laws stuff and really basic mainstream evangelicalism, they read Genesis and it's weird. right? It's this weird kind of language. I mean, maybe they've gone to, they're very steeped in the zeitgeist of, well, Darwinianism and old Earth creation and all the kind of stuff. And you read Genesis 1 and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's just really weird. Like, why does God do this? Why does on day 1? Why does God do this on day 5? All this kind of stuff. But then when you think about this chapter in the context of the entire rest of the Bible, this is foundational. Like this is the bedrock on which the whole Bible stands.
And once you get that in your mind, yes, it kind of makes maybe the Gospels a little bit weirder too. You start realizing that it's being referenced.
Yes.
In ways you wouldn't realize before. So.
In all sorts of little ways. Like, I mean, I mentioned Jesus talking about, in the Sermon on the Mount, where you don't worry about anything, that the lilies in the valley are arrayed better than Solomon in all of his glory. Well, what day of creation is that? Right? Well, it's the third day, right? You have these flowers being raised up on the earth, these, yielding seed.
Now that's interesting. That's why he didn't. Golly, I should have said that. I actually said I wondered why he did both the land and that's it. Of course, because he says he's gonna die like a grain that dies in the ground and bears much fruit. He says that in John's Gospel.
Yeah.
So
or even even the book that your namesake and the book you wrote a commentary on. You have the parable of the seeds, right? I mean, you think about that in the context of day 3, right? You think about and that's the thing when you get into this thing where you get into kind of biblical maximalism or whatever you want to call it, where you're thinking about the whole rest of the Bible with day number 3, and think about all of the instances in the Bible where it talks about crops and things that grow and vegetation, all of that, the whole thing, pointing back to that day and what's going on here. The parable of the seeds, Solomon, all of these things, you can make connections to every growing thing in the Bible, whether, you brought up the vine and how Israel's compared to a vine, all of this. I mean, that's what, I think when you start seeing the Bible on the terms that the Bible presents us, and that's so going through Genesis chapter 1 in this kind of detail is important, because you're coming to grips with the Bible on its own terms, right? So you focus on the first chapter and kind of the weirdness, and you embrace the weirdness of Genesis chapter 1. Then you can understand the language of the Bible, but the Bible language, not necessarily Hebrew or Greek, but the symbolic language that the Bible presents itself in. And once you crack open that door, then so much more of the Bible makes sense.
Yeah, I think we probably should close this, but I'll end this something. I mentioned Jim Jordan a couple of times. I remember very distinctly him talking about reading the book by Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose.
Yes.
And he said that you read that book, and he said when he got to the end, he refused to come to dinner because he had to finish it. He was so enthralled. That he said he had a friend who had skipped a bunch of it and tried to read the ending. And he thought it was stupid. It didn't make any sense to him. His point was that a good book makes its own reader. And the Bible is like that. The Bible wants to make you into a better reader. And to do that, you need to read it over and over again. This is not really a code anyway. It's kind of a familiarity. It's just learning the language. So, I mean, it transcends actual language. It can be translated into English. If it's a good translation, it will work. It just needs to be read again and again. So, Andrew, that's great. Thank you for doing this with me. Sorry we got so far apart. July 4th figured into that and some things like that as far as holidays. So let's do this again soon.
Yeah, summer gets busy. Yeah.
Well, we will do this again soon, and I'll post as soon as. And thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great.